Hello, this is Mohan Kelkar, and this is video number 9 of my Energy Reality series. I want to talk about the modern monuments which are created by fossil fuels. When we think about monuments, we think about Egyptian pyramids or Tajmahal in India, and those are built largely on the back of human labor. But modern life also requires construction of new monuments such as large buildings, dams, bridges, power plants, infrastructure, big machines, and all the other facilities. If you look at the old versus new Beijing, we see the evidence of these modern monuments in terms of big buildings and the infrastructure. The same is true for Shanghai when you look at old versus new picture. The same is true with old versus new picture of Mumbai. And also big hydro dams and bridges which are built over time, as well as wind turbines. These are the modern monuments. And those monuments require three important ingredients: steel, cement, and plastics. Over the last 50 years, the steel consumption has more than doubled, and most of the consumption has occurred in developing countries rather than developed countries. Today, China consumes more than 50% of the steel which is produced. The basic steel manufacturing process involves three steps. First, the metallurgical coal is converted to coke. Then iron ore and coke is mixed at a very high temperature, and that generates pig iron and carbon dioxide, either because of the reaction as well as the need to heat the mixture at high temperature. Then the pig iron and oxygen are mixed together to make steel and carbon dioxide. The requirement for making 1000 kilogram of steel is about 700 kilogram of metallurgical coal. About 70% of the steel produced today is made using this process, and about another 30% is produced using scrap metal, which is less energy intensive. Because of the growth in steel manufacturing, there is also going to be a growth in metallurgical coal. It is expected by 2050 about 1,500 million tons of metallurgical coal will be needed, which will be about 14% of the total coal production. There is about 8% of the total CO2 emission which comes from the steel manufacturing. Is it possible that future steel production can be provided without emission of CO2? According to International Energy Administration, the progress so far reaching net zero emission by 2050 is not on track. And the reasons are that the proposed solution for reducing carbon emissions are not as feasible as some of the other technologies. For example, you can increase the efficiency in the manufacturing process. You can use the natural gas for heating, but some of the processes which are using hydrogen as a substitute for coal are incredibly expensive because we do not have a natural hydrogen source. The CO2 sequestration, which is also very expensive and not possible based on the current regulations and physical understanding. If you examine the McKinsey Net Zero Transition Report, which was published in January of 2022, it shows that to achieve net zero emission, the two important processes which are required are: one is use of hydrogen as a reducing method rather than coal, and then CO2 sequestration. And both these methods are not commercial today and will not become commercial for a while. What about cement? China produces about 55% of the annual cement, and India produces about 8%. Due to the construction boom in China, between 2011 and 2013, China consumed as much cement in 3 years as the entire US over its entire history. Future of the cement production is going to be determined by the development in the developing countries and how do they consume the cement. It's expected that the cement consumption in the future is going to increase significantly, and about 5,500 million tons of cement will be required by year 2050. Making of the cement requires mixing of limestone and clay and heated to about 1450 degrees Celsius or 2060-50 Fahrenheit. It makes the clinker. Then the clinker is ground and mixed with gypsum, and that makes the cement. Cement process generates CO2 because energy required to heat the limestone and when the limestone breaks down to calcium oxide. Roughly about half a ton of CO2 is generated for every ton of cement. According to IEA, over the last 5 years, the amount of CO2 generated for every ton of cement has been increasing rather than decreasing, which is required for net zero emission. Unfortunately, there is no commercial technology which is available today to replace the cement using the existing technology. Can it be possible that we could produce cement without producing CO2? Not really without significant CO2 sequestration. Unfortunately, when we examine the amount of CO2 sequestered per year, it is about 40 million tons of CO2 in 2020. Considering that the total CO2 emission in 2020 is about 40 billion CO2 tons, we are sequestering right now about 0.1% of CO2. Even by 2030, based on the most optimistic estimates, it will be about 0.3% of the CO2 which is emitted. To scale up the CO2 sequestration to a meaningful number in the future is not feasible, perhaps in the next 10 years and even longer. Plastics is also used in construction. Floors, windows, roofs, insulation, pipes, doors, wind turbines, solar panels all require some type of plastic. The consumption of the plastic in the world has been increasing very rapidly. In 2020, roughly 400 million tons of plastic was produced, and it is expected that the consumption of plastic is going to grow at a rate of 3.5%. Starting ingredients for plastic are mostly methane and ethane, and about 8% of the oil production today is used to produce plastic. About 9% is recycled, about 12% is incinerated, and the rest is returned to the earth. There are really no reasonable and inexpensive substitutes for making plastic except using hydrocarbons. So just to summarize, with worldwide population transition from rural to urban areas, there is going to be a tremendous need to build the infrastructure and taller and bigger buildings in concentrated areas. As developing countries become more prosperous, most of the construction is going to happen in those countries. Steel, cement, and plastics are essential ingredients for this construction boom. And with the current technologies, increase in steel, cement, and plastic production will result in additional consumption of fossil fuels. Thank you for listening to the presentation. If you like the presentation, please subscribe to my channel.